He's host of the Crisis Files podcast. Joins me now. Good morning, Roshini. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I love the Yoda. And, Jimmy, I don't know if you know this, but with my executive clients whom I coach, I always say, let's work on your inner Yoda, because the stronger you are on the inside, the more powerful on the outside. So way to go with the outside Yoda and that Yoda voice.
Channel that inner Yoda, you must. Yes.
Good to have you on the program, as always. And Roshini, congratulations. Your podcast, The Crisis Files, has now hit past episode number 50 and 10,000 downloads. And it really hits this latest episode, or episode number 50. Really hits on an important, timely topic, because we see a lot of corporations battling out social issues in the court of public opinion with, for example, Anheuser-Busch doing a major faux pas in terms of turning a lot of their regular, everyday beer drinkers against them.
Maybe
because
their core market.
Their core market, that's the way to put it, because they partnered up with trans activist Dylan Mulvaney. You see Target and what they were doing in their stores with some of their products getting backlash from customers, and there have been significant hits to their bottom lines, their stock prices, so on and so forth, by these companies, to these companies. So that's what you talk about in episode 50, and I want to talk about it here, sort of big picture. What are you noticing?
Well, first of all, a company, regardless of the brand and the size, if it is going to venture into tackling or making a position, taking a stand on any of a number of social issues, and my case, my crisis squad in case file number 50, for the most part, feels like companies should do this. I'm on the fence. I think there has to be a very strong why. Why are you doing it? And then once you have your strong why that's authentic, authentically and as part of your brand promise, your own messaging, your history, then it's the how. And how you do it is as important as the why. Just to do it because everyone's getting into, let's say, LGBTQ issues, or everyone wants to talk about pay equity, or whatever the topic is, you have to really have a why and then understand how you're going about that messaging. So it's really a personal thing individually for each brand, but it is hard in today's climate to not say anything. So that's another calculus, because some people will say, when you say nothing, that's like saying something.
But why is it necessary to publicly say something as opposed to say internally? I think this is touched on a little bit in your podcast, the episode 50. Why is it necessary to say something publicly as opposed to something internally, saying, whatever you're going through, these kinds of things, we support you and we're here for you, and, give that kind of internal message, as opposed to taking some kind of stand out in the public and then risking all of this backlash on heated, controversial issues that deal with social topics where it really is divisive inherently.
Yeah, well, I love that you get into the internal, because Denver's own, she's part of my crisis squad. She's been on your show too. Dr. Cheryl Ziegler, our clinical psychologist on the crisis files, she really gets at that. You've got to first start with your employees. How do your employees feel in the workplace? What do your employees expect from you, the brand, and from you, the management? It does have to start there, Jimmy. You're right. We don't necessarily need to make a public statement, but if we're going to dive in at all, we need to understand why we're diving in. And in that whole analysis, as I go over with, when you're doing a crisis analysis and gap analysis, you first have to understand who your internal audience is and who your external audience is. And often you do need to start with the internal audiences and what kind of messaging you want with them. Now, there are some brands that will never have to get into these kinds of topics, or very, very little, very infrequently will have to get into it. But if you're more of a public brand, like an Anheuser-Busch, a Starbucks, a Target, a Coca-Cola, your consumers likely want you to do something, whatever that messaging is. Now, in the case of Anheuser-Busch, they made some very big missteps, depending on whom you read and what you see and read and what headlines are out there. Really, as far as I understand it, Anheuser-Busch didn't necessarily partner from the get-go with Dylan Mulvaney. They sent her a can of Bud Light with her image on it, celebrating, congratulating her for her 365th day of womanhood, which is part of her campaign on TikTok. And then she made an Instagram video with that. Depending on whom you believe, whether that was predetermined and pre-discussed by them, or Dylan just did that on her own, and then there was backlash, that's kind of what spurred this whole thing. And they have lost multiple billions of dollars because of that, not just sending the can, but how they reacted to it after.
And I want to get to that reaction after the fact here in a moment. But one of the things that's striking to me is all the companies that you just named are not in the business of content like Disney is. That's where they can make some decisions on their programming, and maybe they could make an argument. I'm not saying I would agree with it, particularly when it comes to kids programming, but they could make an argument for why they're doing certain content. Here, you were talking about corporations that are selling products that, you're buying a beer. Okay, you're going to a party and you're going to have beer or what have you. Coca-Cola, same thing. You're going to Starbucks, you're going to buy a coffee. Unless it is an integral part of your brand, when you're just talking about a product, why, Roshini Rajkumar, host of the Crisis Files podcast, are you getting in these issues like that?
Well, you're getting in these issues mainly, Jimmy, because it's always about money. You want to expand your audiences. So if there are certain segments of society that you don't believe you've really infiltrated yet, you may get into certain topics that are core and interesting and important to them so that they say, oh, I'm going to buy a Coke now, or I'm going to go to Starbucks, or I'm going to go to Burger King, whereas in the past I went to McDonald's, because Burger King is all about me and my kind of people. That's why they get into it. Now, so the why, there is a couple different motives there on the why. Maybe it's your internal employees are kind of pushing it in one direction. It could be about money. It could be about a lot of different things. But in answering the why, you need to make sure your answer is authentic to you. You're not just jumping in. I mean, even in my case, look, you're a small business owner. I'm a small business owner. Even in my case, as I saw all the flags, the rainbow flags during Pride Month, the month of June, things happening in my community of Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, as well as around the country, you saw some brands just even on their social media fields, their background wallpaper or in their logo, they somehow incorporated the pride flag. I asked myself, should I be doing this for Roshini Multimedia, my company name? I really thought through it, Jimmy. And I thought, I'm not one, usually I'm a behind-the-scenes crisis coach. Unless I come on your show when I'm more public to comment on crisis, I need to stay pretty neutral. I talk about all things. I'm accepting of all people, but I made the calculated decision for my brand, Roshini Multimedia, that I didn't need to fly a pride flag to get a certain kind of audience or not.
Right.
I try to do that kind of all-encompassing marketing behind the scenes and directly with my different audience.
Well, and of course, what you have in this case with Anheuser-Busch is you have all these long-time older drinkers of their various beer products, that such as Bud Light, that may have one particular view on these issues, and then in trying to court a younger audience, you totally turn off your core market. And that's something that you really have to think through. But you mentioned before about after the fact and how you handle it after the fact, because that's where you get into so much trouble. In the last hour, I was talking about Denver public schools and a lot of how they have handled a slew of faux pas and serious crises over the last couple of years has been a problem of communicating and how you handle after the fact and doubling down on certain things instead of recognizing, okay, this is what's going on and here's how we need to handle it. So talk a little bit about after the fact. Something has happened. You realize that it's hurting you, say tanking your value by $20 billion. What do you do? How do you determine what to do next?
Right. And first you ask yourselves, what are we going to message? Do we have to message an apology? Do we have to message an explanation? Now, apologies are an interesting thing because if you're going to go down that route, you need to actually mean it and you need to have the right words and language that go with it. So you have to decide what is the step. what consumers are basically saying is silence isn't a good response anymore, but you still need to keep it as an option. Sometimes you just kind of let things boil over. Sometimes you do have to dive right into it. The problem with Anheuser-Busch is that they, in that whole Bud Light situation, they didn't really stand by Dylan Mulvaney. She took, I guess, weeks to finally, about a week to 10 days ago, put out a video on Instagram and Twitter responding, saying she's had death threats, and she has not been happy with Anheuser-Busch for not supporting her after she kind of, went out on a limb for them, promoted them. So you have to really understand, who are your spokespeople? If you're going to use influencers in any of these campaigns, you've got to really be in step with them. You've got to really understand, if something should go awry, what's our next step? Unfortunately for brands, fortunately for me as a crisis coach, a lot of brands don't plan for the crisis ahead of the big campaign. Now you notice Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch has a whole new summertime campaign, where they're focusing on country music, football fans, their core audiences. Some may like that. Some may say, wow, that's kind of a few steps too late. So you really do need to be cognizant of what kind of after effect messaging, how deep you're going with it, and are you having your own team, your own management message it, or are you having influencers or public officials? I mean, remember, let's talk about people like Tom Brady, Madonna getting swooped into that whole cryptocurrency mess as that was going down the tubes a couple months ago, and still is being questioned. So the influencers have to question who they're aligning with. The brands have to really, really understand and do a deep dive, cost-benefit analysis into who they let talk about their products.
Roshini Rajkumar, our guest, host of the Crisis Files podcast on all the podcast platforms. One point, and I want to ask a final question on this issue, and then talk about Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk for a moment. One question that is brought up, I forget who on the podcast. You have all five of your experts on this 50th episode edition. One guest makes the point that it is no longer really the case in this day and age that any publicity is good publicity, especially when you can garner some kind of controversy. Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that question of whether it is just, okay, any publicity that you get, even if it's critical, it actually works to your benefit in the end. Because I would agree with that sentiment. That does not seem to be the case anymore.
Yeah, that came from my Crisis Squad member, Jennifer Hellman. She's our PR pro on the Crisis Files. And she said what you quoted is what she said. She said, you need to think 2 to 3 steps ahead. You need to really ask yourself, do we want publicity on this? How are we going to message it? And in her recommendation is focus grouping it ahead of time. I mean, at the very least, as Dr. Ziegler pointed out, talk with your employees. What's the pulse in your own organization before you take it on the road or take it outside your parameters of your brand? So all of those things, and again, as someone who advises brands, I think you need to get a nice blend of perspectives, different ages, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, genders, sexual orientations, to be in the mix of at least assessing the situation before you go out and do any kind of big campaign.
Roshini Rajkumar, our guest. So this is interesting as we turn into something, I don't know, I look at this as more of a fun topic, although it's sometimes it's like what is really going on here makes you scratch your head. Musk versus Zuck, that is Mark Zuckerberg. You had this whole thing where Elon Musk, of course, CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, the owner of Twitter, he went ahead and posted something online on Twitter regarding a cage match fight against Mark Zuckerberg, who then, I think via proxy or somehow, he said he would totally be on board with doing a cage fight. And, of course, Mark Zuckerberg has recently won a Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournament. He's been training. He weighs a lot less than Musk. He's like 15 years younger than Elon Musk. So you have this idea of a cage match, which looks like it could actually happen, which is mind-blowing. The billionaire bash matchup, whatever you want to call it. And then meanwhile, Elon Musk threatening a lawsuit against Mark Zuckerberg and Meta for Zuckerberg's new platform called Threads, which is tied in with Instagram. It's kind of like a Twitter. What do you make of this billionaire squabble going on?
All right, well, first of all, pardon my French, but the cage match situation is getting a little too testosterone-y for me. I mean, come on. It's like leave the fighting to the pros, the boxers, the actual martial art experts, elites out there. That's ridiculous. Now, the legal side of this, that's where that is their playing field. Musk can take it up with Zuckerberg there. Now, interesting that we're really coming to see this Threads thing as some sort of competition with Twitter. It's being called what Twitter used to be in its heyday, in its better days, or its pre-Musk days. There was a full article in yesterday's Wall Street Journal that was written by some of the Wall Street Journal reporters. A day into this, what is Threads all about? What are the pros and the cons? The very fact that you have to have an article explaining what this thing is, and it still has some holes in it, that's not really good for Zuckerberg. So what my advice would be, if either of these guys had hired me to advise them, is Musk should just wait it out, should continue to focus on Twitter and getting Twitter through all of the bad headlines it has. Zuckerberg's team, if they are going to really blow up Threads, which it looks like they're trying to do, they need to make sure all the kinks are out, because some things probably shouldn't have gone public yet on that. It is not fully user-friendly. So it could become a legal battle, but I think it's great for competition. This is the marketplace. If we're truly a capitalistic country, then it's about the marketplace, and the best thing will win out. Now, some of the other competitors or things that brands that have tried to come out platforms to compete with Twitter, I mean, I hadn't heard of a couple of them. I'm not saying I'm totally ahead of the times, but I'm not behind the times. So those brands are taking a while to get the kind of public all-around display and name recognition as Twitter. So I don't know that Elon Musk has to worry too much right now, but I certainly don't want to see either of these guys in little shorts fighting each other.
I kind of disagree with you on that one. I'd sort of like to see the cage match. You know, my bigger question is, where do they broadcast it? I doubt they'll want to do it on a traditional cable network, because both of them are online moguls. They have, Elon Musk is all about a brand of, we want free speech and we want open access and all these kinds of things. I mean, I would say stream it on Threads and stream it on Twitter, and then see which one garners more views, and make sure that you are transparent in how those views are garnered, and have a dual competition, and then make it all for charity.
Well, Jimmy, here's what I'll say. If that day happens, I will offer, no charge, my broadcasting skills to be the play-by-play announcer on that matchup. I promise you, it's definitely a good future episode for the Crisis Files.
I say we team up, and we could broadcast the coverage live there. We could do the color commentary and all that. That'd be great. I'm down for that.
I'd love it. I'd love it. And then my small favor of you and all your listeners is, please listen to not only Case File number 50, but follow The Crisis Files on Twitter and Instagram. We've got a lot of great content out there for you. Oh, yes. It's a tremendous show, and I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of bringing together these different experts on various topics of note. Folks can learn a lot, and maybe we will do an episode together at some point soon. I welcome that, Jimmy. I welcome it. Roshini Rajkumar, host of the Crisis Files podcast and all your podcast platforms, joining us. Thank you so much, my friend. Always a pleasure. Have a great rest of your weekend. You too. Thanks, Jimmy.